Welcome to the D6 Family Ministry Podcast, a place where ideas, principles, and personalities come together to give you a ministry advantage that empowers the church and home.
I don't know anything more important in our society or in the kingdom of God than to help the church, help the family.
Discipleship is not an event, it's a way of life.
And one day it just hit me that discipleship at home was not about doing more. It was about inviting Christ into what we were already doing.
The goal of family ministry is not families sitting on the couch holding hands and singing Kumbaya. The ultimate goal is families that love God, love people, and make disciples of all peoples.
So that's why you're here. You're here to say 1 hour a week, as significant and as awesome as it is, we know that it's not enough, and we want to be intentional with every hour.
You're listening to the D6 Podcast. Here are your hosts, Marianne Howard, Ron Hunter, and Josh Wooten.
I am so excited about today's conversation, and Miss Amanda, tackles the subject of mental health. And this first part is really geared towards equipping ministry leaders, which I'm excited about. And so to kind of kick things off, I want to throw out the question. She talks about the value of community and friendship and the role that plays in our lives. And so I want to ask you guys, how has God used friendship or community to walk alongside you and your family?
Well, I'll jump in here first, because when I hear the words mental health in the past, I would be like, oh, I'm going to run from that. I want to turn that off. This episode's not for me. And I want to encourage our listeners, hey, if you've just heard that, don't define it the way you think you would define it. And I think for me, Marianne, that community usually happens sitting in a life group, sharing prayer time with each other. And when somebody pipes up and says a prayer request, well, help me, I'm struggling with, just the frustration of raising an infant. That borders on those same issues. And I'm like, I struggle on that too. And all of a sudden now you feel like you're not alone. And that community provides support in ways that just decimates isolation.
That's right.
And that's the big one for me. And we my wife and I have dealt with that all the way through the child rearing years to know, I don't want to walk this path alone. I need a lot of other parents who can share their stories of blowing it and succeeding. And that's what I see for community for me.
Well, I'm right there with you, Ron. As a ministry leader myself, it is, to be honest, without my life group and having that safe space to be able to offload, what I'm able to anyway, in a small group setting, these people help carry my burdens, but also it makes me, keeps me from ending up like Tom Hanks and Castaway, talking to a painted up volleyball or something to myself. And it just, they are an anchor for me. It is the one place I look forward to every week, knowing that, hey, these people are coming around my living room and we're going to get to share and be honest. And we have purposefully sought out, most of our group consists of parents who are in the same season of life. I've found there's a great benefit to doing life with people who are in the same season. And that is what is happening for us within our small group. And it's nice to bounce ideas off each other and to be able to, walk and do life together with that community.
Absolutely. You guys know a little bit about my story. I got sick and my community was sitting in that waiting room, praying for me, meeting needs, providing meals for my children, driving them to school, just loving us tangibly and really modeling that Acts 2. Just back to that word isolation, this interview is perfect timing. All of us are dealing with an anxious year. Every single one of us. There is trauma. There is hard. There is a lot of life happening in these days. And I think I want to just say to the ministry leader out there, don't walk alone. Be vulnerable. Find someone that's safe to walk with you. That's kind of what Amanda encourages us to do. Isolation is a dangerous place.
Marianne, you're right on that. We need to be able to reach out and ask whichever community we're in. And I would I would strongly recommend, whether it's your life group or your church. And in fact, Amanda is going to talk about EAPs, which is kind of that employer assisted programs. And I think this is true for both secular and for Christian ministry. I know at Randall House and D6 Family Ministry, we have EAPs. We don't call them EAPs. We just said, hey, if we know somebody is struggling, talk to your supervisor. We have some resources. It might be handing them one of our counseling resources, but we have at times through the years paid for counseling services, not just one appointment, but multiple appointments to help our team members who are struggling with an issue. And obviously we are worried, can I disclose that issue? There are certain issues that, when you disclose them, you have to raise the red flag and report it. But most of these issues of anxiety or marriage or just everyday life, somebody can come along and assist and get you plugged into a professional Christian counselor who can really help walk alongside you. And the first place to consider, if you're in a secular place, is go to your HR department. Talk to them. You can bypass the stigma of talking to your boss about that and just say, hey, do we have any EAPs or counseling assistance in addition to? Or you can go ahead and call your number on your health card, whether or not you're with Blue Cross or Aetna or whatever. Call them and say, hey, does my program include this? And then you can seek out the appropriate Christian counseling resources to apply it to. And I'm just so thankful that Amanda hits these. So when we come back from the break, we're going to jump right into this interview with Amanda.
D6 curriculum is centered on the discipleship philosophy found in Deuteronomy 6, that parents and grandparents should be primary in the discipleship of their children. To accomplish this, D6 curriculum aligns every age in church on the same biblical passage or topic. Family alignment serves as a catalyst for parents to have conversations with their children about faith in the home. D6 also provides many other tools to help parents and grandparents. Learn how D6 curriculum can empower parents in your ministry at d6family.com.
We are joined today by Miss Amanda Dunlap. Amanda is a licensed professional counselor. She is the Director of Clinical Services at The Next Door in Nashville, Tennessee, where they provide a continuum of evidence-based substance abuse and mental health services for women in an environment of faith and healing to restore hope and a lifetime of recovery, where she has now served for 13 years. Amanda is also married to Matthew, and they have 2 awesome boys. Amanda, I'm so glad that you are here with me. Another thing that we need to add to this bio, I think, that people need to not hold against you is that we have been friends for a very long time. So
yes,
I'm so glad you're here. I'm really thankful for people like yourself, people who are willing to share your experiences and your expertise just to educate the rest of us on matters that I feel like are often misunderstood. So I just want to thank you for sharing with us today and helping equip us in the matter of mental health is what we'll specifically be talking about today.
Yes. Thankful to have the opportunity to share, Casey.
So we've got a lot of church leaders who listen in. Why would you say this conversation, this topic of mental health, is an important conversation for us to have, specifically for those church leaders?
Yeah, that's a great question. I kind of wanted to start it off with a story of one of my coworkers, our development director, shared with me a few years back of going into a church. We are a faith-based organization here at the Next Door, and going into churches, partnering with them about mental health and substance use. And she was taking some resource pamphlets, right, to a pastor, and wanted just to have 5 minutes with this pastor. Really a church that's been in, referral source for us, been a response partner with us in the community. And she said, I just need 5 minutes of your time. You've been given a lot to us. I want to offer some resources to you for if anyone in your congregation that may be suffering from drug addiction or dealing with mental illness that you may come in contact with. And the pastor said, well, we don't have that problem in our congregation. And that came as a shock to me. And it may come as a shock to some of those listening, or it may resonate even from the stance of the church and how we interact with mental illness and what our role is in helping those that maybe need help. And I think that's why this conversation I'm very passionate about it and look forward to this conversation, because as we know, nearly 1 in 5 American adults will have a diagnosable mental health condition in any given year. 1 in 5. And then 46% of Americans will meet the criteria for a diagnosable mental health condition sometime in their life. And half of those people develop that condition by the age of 14. So we're not talking about someone that may be slipping through the cracks. We're talking about someone maybe 3 people down from you sitting next to you in church. Right. We're talking about a number of people, half of our population at some point in their time. So I think that is why this is a great conversation, and I'm thankful for the opportunity to interact and educate and advocate for the needs of those that may be sitting there not getting needs met. So,
yeah, absolutely. And what a tragedy to feel like you're so unaware of that. And, especially as a pastor, someone who knows your people so well and is discipling them and walking through life with them, and to just not understand that. And I'm thankful. That's, again, a reason I'm thankful for this conversation, like you said. So then how do we, as church leaders, start creating a healthy atmosphere? So now that we recognize that, even from those stats that you just shared, we recognize that, okay, there are people here that are sitting just a few seats down from me that I'm rubbing shoulders with at church every week. So how do we create a healthy atmosphere within our churches around the topic? What are some things maybe we need to be aware of, or making sure that we're doing or not doing, or things that we are or are not communicating? What are some of those healthy things that we can be doing?
I really think this starts, Casey, in ensuring and creating small group atmospheres, right? We are relational beings, and I think the Lord created us that way, to interact with each other, hold each other accountable, disciple each other. And in that is in the woes and the high points of our lives, right? And really those conversations or realizations happen in small group settings. So it's really, as a church and a church leader, creating those spaces to have that conversation with someone that if I just show up on a Sunday, I may not feel safe enough to share the struggles I'm going through or the depression that I'm in right now. And recognizing, that's the big thing, recognizing when you have someone in your church that may not have shown up for a few weeks. And you really do that on a smaller scale. Those that are most connected, you may not know who's sitting on the 3rd row, 2 down every Sunday, right? But that small group leader or the pastor may know that too in certain small setting churches. But not only stopping there, but asking the question why, or where are you? You're missed. A simple extension of a hand to say, you're missed, and I want to know what's going on in your life. So really creating that safe atmosphere is where it starts, and how church leaders can start formation of the realization that this is going on in their church, but also the acceptance of it's okay for you to share this. You're safe here with us. That's really starts from, the top, your head pastor, and creating that atmosphere for that. And speaking on that when appropriate, from the pulpit, and acknowledging that, when someone's diagnosed with cancer, sometimes they're the first on the list, right? The prayer list, but maybe not when it's safe enough to share. Someone may be going through a dark season in their life with their mental health illness. You don't have to put all that, but you could also extend them on the prayer list too, right? Just leaving space for that. That seems appropriate. And that changes with different congregations. So I want you to be acknowledged of that. And the head really starts with the lead pastor in that conversation.
Yeah. Which, someone who's not dealing with a mental illness still probably needs to be checked in on,
Absolutely.
So,
yes.
So that's just a great practice,
Absolutely.
And when the Lord brings someone to your mind, how many times have, we texted each other, been like, hey, I was just thinking about you, which means so much. And maybe maybe, the Lord put you on my heart for a reason. Maybe you needed to be encouraged or to know that you're thought of.
Right.
And then especially dealing with a mental illness, I'm sure
Yeah, sometimes that
be,
trigger, that text could be the place to go, okay, maybe I can go out on leap of faith here and say, I'm not doing well. Just that
right.
simple. I could use some extra prayer, and then some more digging can happen. But absolutely reaching out to those that maybe and aren't suffering from mental illness, that will definitely be happening as well. Absolutely,
Sure.
Chrissy.
Well, with the statistics that you just shared, if those are accurate, then that means that our churches are just filled with people who are really struggling with some type of mental health issue, some, more severe than others, I would probably guess. Do you think that people are willing to come forward and talk about those things? And if they're not, why do you think that is?
The biggest word that comes to mind would be sometimes there's a lot of shame. We're dealing with shame. Maybe we are not in a fully knowing of our own mental health status, right? Like where we're at while we're feeling the way we are, while we're resorting to certain coping skills that we've never done before, whatever that looks like. So shame would be probably a number one reason why people wouldn't come forward. And, I really, when I was, thinking on our conversation for today, Casey, I really went back to the book of Acts. And I really think the church of Acts did this really well, right? And how small group formation, in homes, they lived life together, and they were able probably to recognize when someone was struggling a little bit more. And again, points back to that small group formation in discipleship, and to be able to recognize this in our communities. And I think it bars well to kind of look back to the Church of Acts and how well they did this, and looking into each other's lives, and really their commitment to fellowship, showing up for each other, and not just in the lows, but in the highs of life, being able to be there for each other. And I really, when shame comes into play, I really think I'm encouraged to see, and we have a ways to continue to grow as the church, to continue to find ways to move from a sympathetic church to more of an empathetic church. And I think that's key in people feeling safe enough to seek help, people feeling safe enough to even ask their person they're living life with how they're doing, right? That's kind of a scary question to ask sometimes. Sometimes we may not want to know the answer because we don't know what to do with it, right?
Yeah.
But if our church is creating the culture of everything matters here, your spiritual growth and development is first and foremost. But along that, there's a whole person sitting there. And so their mental health is just as important. In order to grow spiritually, their mental health to be in a healthy place and be able to hold each other accountable in that setting too is just as important. So I would say shame may be the biggest thing that somebody in our church may be dealing with in order not to come forward.
Yeah. And what a difficult place to be when you're already dealing with it, and then you feel shame about it and feel like you can't share with anyone. So you talked about the pastor and how it starts from the top down, right? And sharing from, the pulpit, sharing, I would say probably, on social media about things, just encouraging people, in that way. But whose job is it to address this? Is it just the pastors, or who else needs to be looking for these types of scenarios?
Love this question. And, it is not, pastors, take a deep breath right here. It is not all on the pastor, right? No way. That's sometimes maybe where the church can continue to grow in that area too, that it is not all on the pastor. It is laymen in the congregation. It is those that have stepped into leadership roles. It is those that maybe not have been tapped for leadership roles, but are leaders sitting there and really just a connector, and we have those in our church communities, and somebody that's willing to connect. How you do this, though, is to have relationships in your community outside of those walls of your church or those small group settings. So how can you address those is to know who you can reach out to when it's kind of past our lane, right? And we need to connect someone to someone in the community. We've got to know our resources. And if you don't have those, that may be a conversation to start having with someone in your church that is a mental health provider to say, how can we start this as a referral source for our people in our congregation? I'm starting to see this a little more. And how can we set that set them up for success and health, because really that would decrease so much stigma, Casey, if we started having those tough conversations and had that just availability to resources. It's a great resource, I was going to say here for those, because I know many are listening outside the Nashville, Tennessee arena. And NAMI is a great, website to go to, and that's the National Alliance on Mental Illness. That will connect you to resources, connect you to your local opportunities for there to get plugged in, and start the conversation to educate yourself. So that starts from the head pastor, laymen in the church, leaders, and being willing to bring in different resources to your church to have opportunities for your people.
So it sounds like this is something we need to be proactive about
absolutely.
as believers and leaders in the church. I mean, you and I are both married to pastors, and we know that our husbands, bear the burden of our people. And, there is, there's a difference in, going to a pastor for counseling where, it can be, about scripture or about my walk with Christ or my relationship, maybe it's my marriage or my relationship with my kids, or, there's like so many things that you can go to your pastor for godly counsel. But then there's a step past that pay grade of, okay, we need expertise here. And so what a great resource for them to be, to have, but also, like you said, like, let's be proactive about it. Like get to that resource, find those things out, start rolling that ball. So this isn't creeping up on this. And then we're like, like now I'm in a situation,
That's exactly right. Well, partnerships are really crucial. And I'm thankful for the next door and our partnerships in the community to know when we need to, do a warm handoff for someone that needs services beyond our expertise. And, another avenue for pastors just to have in their back pocket, if there's not a local community counseling center, I know in Tennessee, even small communities, that's not always accessible. Sometimes there are EAPs, which is what some employers offer, and people can tap into their EAP, and counseling can be provided to them at a discounted rate, and sometimes even up to 6 to 8 sessions free. That a lot of people don't know that they're already paying for, or their employer is, in getting mental health treatment. And counseling is the first step in that. Because sometimes people have that at their fingertips and don't realize it. I get calls all the time from friends or those that have someone that are looking for counseling. That's the first question I'm going to say is, do they have an EAP possibly set up that they aren't aware of? And it's been very kind of a sigh of relief when there's, financial means to be able to help pay for that maybe they wouldn't have otherwise. So I wanted to say that as well.
Yeah, I'm sure that's another layer to this that people might not even consider. So thank you for sharing that.
Yes.
We're obviously sitting in a very unique point in history with COVID-19, right? I mean, how crazy is it? But so would you say that the pandemic is affecting mental health?
Oh, Casey, yes. So, right, that seems like the obvious answer, and everyone listening goes, well, duh.
Yeah.
Yes. Only from adults to our children, and here in Nashville, middle schoolers walking into school for the first time in 348 days?
Yep.
Yes, I know the number. And and I have been overly concerned about the social and emotional well-being of children that have been, maybe some sift through the cracks during this pandemic. But all that to say, we won't go down that, is yes, we are seeing great impacts here. And I know we are here at the next door, mental health and substance use, seeing greatly, detrimental numbers as far as the relapses, the overdoses that have happened, because stress is an obvious increase to mental health and substance use. You're going to see a trigger that happens that it makes needed precautions put into place. Isolation is also a main contributing factor, not only to substance use, which is what my specialty here at the next door would be, but to mental health. A recent number, I wanted to share some of these numbers, a recent number of over 81,000 overdose deaths in the last 12 months that ended in May 2020. So that's not even including the numbers from the last year, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And I will say here at the Next Door, in my 13 years, this last year, we don't always hear of possible previous clients' death, but we have heard it more and more each month. And it's just the reality of what the pandemic really has added a layer of barriers to in seeking help and seeking treatment. And it's, the pandemic ushered in lots of stress, isolation, and economic issues that many have never dealt with, which I said earlier are all triggers for addiction and relapse, and it also robbed many people from seeking treatment for either depression, anxiety, and along with substance use. It's put up walls to be able to do that. So us as providers have been trying to be creative. You hear about telehealth. Many, which is nice for those in maybe a more rural area that may not have resources. Telehealth is an option today, and that hasn't always been available up until this. So I'm always trying to find the silver lining in situations. And now that we're coming out of a little bit of the fog of the last year, and probably the hardest year yet of my career, has been seeing that opportunity for resources be offered via telehealth and insurances are acknowledging that is promising. May not be the best way, but it is a positive way for many people seeking treatment for mental illness.
Yeah, that's great. Okay, so one of the things we were talking about earlier is you said, notice who's not sitting where they typically were. Okay, but also, we have people who in our lives where maybe you're a small group leader and you recognize that person's not sitting there and you check in on them. Are there other things that we can be looking for, and how can we as, lay leaders be helping them as they are walking through, particularly, this pandemic time? What are some things that we can be looking for? Maybe there's some signs that we can, are triggers.
Really frequent check-ins. And, I always lean into people's conversations or how they start off a conversation, right? Like, so what's been going on in life? What does that look like for you today? And if it is very negative in nature, right, which we've all been there in the last year, right? Many of us, and it continues to stay that way, or maybe they've had a huge shift in their life, a job loss, a death, a move, their children are struggling going through this time as well. Any kind of extra or added stressor, I would lean into those conversations and just see how they're dealing with that. And what does that look like? And sometimes if you know someone really well, it's interesting to pay attention to people's sleep patterns. You're not always going to get to that nitty gritty, but say if they made the comment of, I haven't slept in days, or all I want to do is sleep and all I find myself is laying in bed. Those are like trigger kind of comments that could go, okay, let me listen in a little bit more to this, or follow up with some follow-up questions. And also acknowledge when it's the time to maybe, can I connect you with somebody that may be going through the same thing you are? Because if you are a church leader and you know someone that maybe be struggling, it's good to know that they're not alone, right?
Sure.
And that's why that extension of check-ins is so important. It's very crucial.
Yeah,
for sure. And I was going to bring up, just some healthy ways in the time of this pandemic and outside of this pandemic to cope with stress, because stress can be a trigger for many mental illnesses. I'll just made a few lists here that can be maybe resources for and options for leaders to use. Is the first one was take breaks from watching, reading, and listening to news stories. You would not. The conversations I've had with folks in the last year on feeling overwhelmed, the stress in their life, it's that constant resource of information overload, right? Mm-hmm. And it's coming at us from all angles. We walk out, open the window, and it's in our face, right? In essence. Right. But finding breaks in that and moments of stepping away and going, I just want to know the person in front of me today. And I don't want to know everything else that everyone has input from, because that gets really heavy and holds a lot of space mentally for us. So that would be number one. And take care of our bodies. Taking care of sleeping or eating, who we surround ourselves with is very important. Our community, which is why this conversation I'm very passionate about. If our churches can be that community for people to increase their health and decrease their stress, right? make time to unwind and connect with others, huge, which is a great place for our church to step into that role and offer opportunities for people to connect with others, and in the faith-based setting. So in this conversation, that's really huge, and ways to decrease your stress.
Yeah, those are great. Thank you.
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
so I love things like that. I love for our listeners to walk away with, some little tidbits to chew on, or some things that they need to apply. So maybe give us a few takeaways. What are some advice that you have for church leaders to walk away from this conversation with?
First, I want to say before I get into the list, right? We all like lists. It's just if you've listened this far and you're a church leader, thank you. I mean, thank you from a mental health provider in the community that sees this need day in and day out, gets phone calls from not even in these walls at the next door, but at home at night, late at night, when someone's needing a resource. Thank you for being that church leader that's willing to take the next step to educate yourself and to have a tool belt to offer connection and resources to your people. So on that is to know your people. Know your people in your community. And that may be if you have a larger congregation, or maybe multiple congregations, having people connected to you that know your people. Have an awareness and a willingness to discuss this is the first thing. And second would be, in that knowing your people, is knowing your lane. So knowing that you are the spiritual mentor for a many, and many that you may never know that you are that spiritual mentor for. And knowing your lane to know when this has reached my, in our relationship with Matthew as a pastor, we have this all the time, and does premarital counseling often. And he knows when those flags go off that I need to hand this off to, another profession besides mine. And so knowing your lane is really important, and be willing to acknowledge that someone with a different expertise can maybe help this need, along with faith and that piece. And then know your resources. So in your community, if you work in a small community, I'm always happy to help delve in, look for that, but know your resources ahead of time before the person, the name, the face is sitting in front of you. Know possibly who you connect them to, or where you could go get that resource, and being able to be a beacon of light in a myriad of ways for your people in your congregation is to know your resources. So that would be my 3 no's.
That's awesome. Know your people, know your lane, know your resources.
That's right.
Amanda, thank you so much for sharing. And like Amanda said, thank you, leaders, for listening and for equipping yourselves. If you are in the Nashville area, or even if you're not and you're curious about the Next Door, you can go to thenextdoor.org and see what they are all about. It's a wonderful organization. Maybe a couple other resources that they might need, Amanda, as church leaders?
Yes, I was going to extend, if you know someone, a woman specifically, we are a women's only treatment center that is seeking a substance use treatment. I would give you the T&D Hope line, and that number, I had it laying right here, I should know it off the top of my head, but it's 1-855-T&D Hope, 1-855-T&D Hope. And that we will get you in. We serve a myriad of payer sources, uninsured even. So wanted to offer that as well. And also, as I mentioned earlier, is NAMI, which is NAMI.org. That's the National Alliance on Mental Illness, full of resources. I'm a part of many organizations that meet in committees, and NAMI always has a representation in each kind of county. Or a multitude of counties. So NAMI is a great avenue to reach out to in the States. And so I would look into that to be able to start knowing your resources in your local area.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for helping equip us. It was a joy to have you. Stay tuned sometime soon for part 2 of this conversation.
Wow. The information that she just shared, I'm so thankful there is a part 2 to this podcast coming up next week, because it feels like I couldn't write fast enough. As a ministry leader, she really opened my eyes to some things that we as a church have not been, I wouldn't say blind to, but I love how the conversation of mental health is being more and more talked about within the church community, and helping to get rid of that stigma, and just the the little things that she said to look for, notice who is not sitting in the pew next to you, who's missing, and checking in, and even, being proactive about finding licensed counselors and those within your community that are already set up to help people who are struggling with mental health issues. As a church, sometimes we feel like we need to be the one-stop shop to try to fix everything. And that is not the way God has designed us. I want to be able to partner with those in our community that have a passion for this particular subject, because I'm not an expert. There will be times people drop things in my lap or bring baggage that are way too heavy for me to carry. And I think it's very important, as she said, for us as churches to have those resources, a list of those resources in our community, and that toolbox pack to be able to go, okay, you're dealing with this. Well, this is somebody in our community that we know that deals with these issues, and be able to point them in the right direction. And of course, follow up.
Exactly right. She said three things in there: know your people, know your lane, know your resources. And I really love that. In this first interview, and I don't mind telling him, this is the first one, and the target audience of this was ministry leaders. That's who she's talking to. Part 2 next week, she's going to hit some similar fields, but she's going to talk to the people in the pew. And let's be really honest, ministry leaders. We are not only ministry leaders, but we're also the people in the pew. We need to be ministered to. And so be willing to put on both of those hats and listen. And know this, that your life group leaders, your small group leaders, they're usually the first triage people who get a chance to hear when somebody is struggling or when they have a hard time. And it could come up in a casual conversation before or after class, around the coffee pot, donuts, whatever, but it can also come up in prayer time. And you need to resource your ministry leaders, not to be the professional counselor, but I would recommend, we have a counselor who has spoken at D6 multiple times. His name is Dr. Eddie Moody, and he has First Aid for Emotional Hurts. And that book is for that teacher, pastor, to help them understand how to segue to conversations and guide them in the right help. And then he has all these pamphlets for the people in the pew who are struggling with, I think there's 12 to 14 different titles out there, from addiction to sexual issues to depression, you name it. He's got every one of these major areas covered, and you can just hand them a small, non-intimidating booklet as a starter point as you begin to work them into finding help that they need, depending on how much and how little or how much they need along the way.
Ron, we had those in our parent resource area, those first aid cards. And the first week we set them out, we probably bought 20 of each one. And the first week we set them out, I was shocked, and it was sobering to realize the first 2 to go were the anxiety and depression with kids. It was helps for parents. And those 2 cards slots were empty before anything else.
It is. And let me give you a phrase, ministry leaders, that you can use when you set out those books, and they have titles like, First Aid for Sexual Issues or First Aid for Anxiety. People have stigmas, and they don't want to be seen as, oh, I'm getting one of these. So from the pulpit or from the teacher's lectern or sitting in the chair or in the big circle, say, hey, I'm putting out these booklets. You may know somebody that needs this. You don't need to say, you may need this. You say, you may know, and you may need to pick them up and take them to somebody in need. And that takes that stigma out. So please couch it in such a way that gives people permission to pick them up.
Right along those same lines, I think what I was challenged by this conversation is she said we need to move from being a sympathetic church to an empathetic church. And when you think about the word compassion in Colossians chapter 3, that word literally is translated co-suffer. And I'm so blessed by that. Like, I was so challenged by her words there, that as ministry leaders, we got to have God's eyes and co-suffer. And she said, we've got to create a ministry environment that communicates that everything matters.
Yes.
I'm just going to let that land. That's landing on me. I'm sitting with that. I'm praying through that. I work with students and teenagers. And I want to have God's eyes to see when every one of those students walks through the doors of my ministry, that I am aware with his eyes and everything matters. And we've got to be really careful that we don't assume things and that we create an environment of safety.
Mm-hmm. I also love this is above our pay grade. Mm-hmm. Know when this gets to a point you need to refer. I learned very early in my ministry that most things were above my pay grade in counseling. And there's a reward to that too, because when you refer a couple out for counseling, that guy does not want to pay for that counseling. Therefore, he's going to listen to the advice of that counselor he's paying for, so he has to pay for minimal amount of appointments. But he'll tolerate several and do nothing when the pastor or ministry leader is telling him what to do. So be willing to refer, because it's going to be more effective. It's going to reduce your time, but it's going to get the right help to that person in need. It's been a good conversation for Amanda. I'm glad this is, as Marianne and Josh said, this is part 1. Next week, we're going to come back. We're going to deal with her picking up this ball and dealing with this from the person in the pew. And, I don't mind telling you, she quotes some stats in this next one that you're going to want to take notes on, because you're going to realize that this is far more important in your church than you think it is. And if you think we don't need it, I would think your discernment might need a little adjustment on these areas. She's going to cover some stats and get into a generational application of discipleship when it comes to dealing with mental illness within our families and the baggage that we have in our own families. So I'm looking forward to that. Tune in next week. And until then, we'll be praying for you and your ministry that it will be effectively connecting to all generations.
You've been listening to the D6 Podcast. You can learn more about D6 at d6family.com.